The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Because of the incompetence of this Prime Minister and Liberal City Hall in Toronto, rent there has more than doubled over the last 9 years. What's worse is that the Prime Minister's so-called Housing Accelerator Fund has given $500 million to Toronto, and only months later, the politicians in that city hiked up home building taxes by 20%. Wow. Now 30% of all home building costs is government taxes alone. Why does the Prime Minister keep sending our money to build bureaucracies that block homes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we see the Conservative leader's hypocrisy on full display. Let's talk about their housing proposal, which the Conservative leader has been delaying debate on for months because he knows it's not ambitious enough. His proposal won't build homes fast enough, doesn't reach enough cities, and creates unnecessary bureaucracy. The Conservative leader would also rip up the 179 housing accelerator agreements and put the GST back on apartment construction. His clear lack of ambition on housing is partly how we ended up here in the first place.
Hear, hear.
That's right. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
When I was housing minister, we built 200,000 homes in 1 year. The rent was only $900 and mortgage payments were half of what they are today. Fast forward to present, the Prime Minister wants to has given $500 million to Toronto City Hall to jack up new taxes on home building. No wonder that when the President of the Residential Construction Council of Ontario, Richard Lyle, was asked whether the Prime Minister would keep his promise for 3.9 million new homes by the end of the decade, he said, and I quote, "No chance." Mr. Speaker, why doesn't he stop funding bureaucracy so that we can get out of the way and build homes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
It is shameful, again, that the Conservative leader continues to exploit the very real anxieties of Canadians. When the Conservative leader was housing minister, let's talk about his record. He withdrew the government from cooperative housing. He supported the construction of 0 new apartments, and he gutted affordable housing initiatives and created new bureaucracies. His housing proposal today continues to fall short. The Conservative leader is simply all slogans and no answers.
That's right. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
My common sense plan to build the homes would reward municipalities that speed up permits and punish the politicians that get in the way. His approach has not only doubled housing costs, but he's built up Toronto City Hall with monstrous financial transfers so that they can block construction. Mr. Speaker, there have been 50 new tent encampments added in the City of Toronto in 6 weeks. Wow. There are 250 tent cities in Toronto alone. Is that his plan, to block homes and put up tents?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the so-called plan that the Conservative leader has put forward on housing does absolutely nothing to address homelessness or encampments. What we're actually investing in is hundreds of millions of dollars to help municipalities across the country build more housing rapidly, create the wraparound supports necessary to support people facing homelessness, and continue to be there on the most ambitious and comprehensive housing plan that this country has ever seen. This is part of what we're having to make up for the lost years in which he was housing minister 10 years ago, not creating housing for Canadians, not investing in our future.
The Honourable Member from Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, Canada's housing crisis is only getting worse. The Liberals claim in Budget 2024 that they're going to build 3.87 million homes by 2031. And that would mean a new home completed every 57 seconds every day. At the Housing Committee, I asked Richard Lyle, a home building expert, if this was realistic, and he said, not a chance. The Prime Minister is not worth the cost of housing. Will this Prime Minister stop funding photo ops and start building the homes that Canadians desperately need?
The Honourable Minister Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, with the recent housing plan, we set out to build the number of homes that's actually required to solve the housing crisis. With respect, Mr. Speaker, it's disappointing in the extreme that the Conservatives won't even set a goal that will solve the problem. What's more interesting, Mr. Speaker, is the member who posed the question actually had her community benefit with a $31.5 million investment to build more homes in Kelowna. She's advocating that money is taken away from her city and be replaced by a program for which Kelowna is ineligible. Most MPs advocate for investments in their community. It's disappointing my colleagues doing the opposite.
The honourable member from Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was announced just this morning that, in fact, housing starts are down in my community and also across the country. Wow. And in 2015, people could actually afford a home. 9 years of this NDP Liberal government has only brought us a housing crisis. And the head of the Residential Construction Council of Ontario said that construction is down there, and we are seeing this across the entire country. He said high financing costs and development charges means home builders are sitting at home instead of building homes. So since this Prime Minister has no meaningful plan, will the Liberals vote for our housing bill put forward by the Conservative opposition leader to build the homes, not bureaucracy?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, if she argues that housing starts in her community are down, why is her solution to cut funding for housing in her community? Exactly. It's endemic to the Conservative approach. When you actually look at the plan that they put forward, it includes a tax hike on new apartment construction. It includes cuts to the programs that fund affordable housing, cuts to the programs that fund cities to build housing, cuts to the programs that allow young people to get into the market for the first time. The cuts are so extreme, even Conservative premiers are crying out, threatening to call snap elections in order to avoid the prospect of Conservative cuts. Cuts will not build homes.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member from Tobique-Mactaquac.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, Canadians are hungry and homeless. Yesterday it was confirmed at committee what Conservatives have been saying all along, that this housing minister will never meet his targets. In St. John, New Brunswick, the lack of housing options are leaving a family in a leaky, moldy apartment, and the father of 4, Corey Hamilton, is worried about the health and safety of his family. 10 new people a week are going homeless in Halifax in the minister's own backyard. When will they stop funding photo ops and start building homes Canadians desperately need?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, even Conservative premiers recognize the damage these cost-cutting austerity Conservatives would wreak on our country. The only thing these Conservatives know how to do is cut, cut, cut.
That's right.
They want to cut the first home savings account that has allowed more than 750,000 young Canadians to save up for their first home. Right. They want to cut support for infrastructure that is allowing municipalities to build homes. They want to tear Canada down, Mr. Speaker, but we won't let them.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member from Tobique-Mactaquac.
And all this current federal Liberal government wants to do is blame, 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 and pass the buck. That non-answer will do absolutely nothing for the Hamilton family in St. John who are in desperate need of alternatives for housing. Since the Prime Minister has no plan and the Liberals have no chance tomorrow to build the homes, and all they're wanting to do is continue to build the bureaucracy, why don't they give all of their members a chance to vote freely on this leader's, Conservative leader's plan for housing? Let's do that tomorrow. A free vote.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Order. À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, it is not only Conservative premiers who understand the terrible damage Conservative cuts would do to our country. Canada's mayors get it too.
That's right.
And that's why it was so shameful to hear the progressive mayors of 2 great Canadian cities, Toronto and Montreal, be vilified by the Conservative leader today. We believe in working with our municipal partners and our provincial ones. That's how we build Canada.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable.
Mr. Speaker, the cat's out of the bag after 9 years of inflationary spending supported by the Bloc, which tripled the cost of housing in Montreal. A detailed report in La Presse today confirms that the time it takes to obtain a building permit in Montreal is interminable. It takes 540 days to build a home in the mayor's own borough of Ville-Marie. 540 days. Will the Prime Minister stop rewarding bureaucratic incompetence and instead reward municipalities that actually speed up housing construction, as proposed by the leader of the opposition's Common Sense Bill? The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. Mr. Speaker, it's incredible. The member is asking a question about housing. But the leader of the opposition will table a bill that will cut measures for affordable housing, that will cut measures that will support communities that build housing, that will cut measures that will support individuals who buy their first home. The problem with the Conservatives is that they're not a good thing for Canadians. They're a disaster. The Honourable Member from Mégantic-L'Érable. You know what happens with this housing minister's measures? After 9 years, more and more Quebecers are living in tents in Montreal because of this minister's and the Prime Minister's incompetence. Will the Prime Minister accept our common sense plan for Canada and Quebec to sign a common sense agreement to encourage housing construction in Montreal? An agreement that will give a bonus to competent municipalities and punish municipalities that don't build housing. Will the Prime Minister at least allow his MPs a free vote to support the bill to build housing and not build red tape? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague speaks about building housing. Mr. Speaker, do you know how the Conservative leader, how much the Conservative leader built when he was a housing minister? He built 6 entire affordable housing units during his entire mandate. Quebec municipalities are building 8,000 right now with the support of the Canadian government. So let's compare Quebec's apparently incompetent municipalities with the Conservative leader's own record.